Okay. Share screen. Okay. Oops, no, I don't want that. Okay. Okay. I'm assuming you can all see that. Yeah, awesome. Okay. All right. Welcome. Thank you again for being here. I'm feeling really excited to share this with all of you. I can't see your faces at this point as I'm presenting, so if anything happens, if you need my attention, yeah, I don't think I'll see the chat either. So if someone could unmute and grab my attention, I'd appreciate that. But hopefully, this will be smooth sailing from here on out. So welcome again. This is my final practicum presentation. I didn't have to do a practicum presentation. No one has to do one, but this is something that I have really enjoyed. And it's been a part of my accountability to put together a little presentation and make sure that the broad content that I'm exploring, I want to make sure that I keep bringing it back into this practice of being able to articulate it and invite people into the process that I've been in as well. Over the last 13 weeks, I have shared this process in my blog on my website, dopamine.com, and I'll mention the blog a couple times throughout as I go into detail over these last several weeks. And of course, with 1 hour together today, I won't have as much space and time to do that. So yeah, as you're partaking in this presentation, if there's anything that sparks your interest or you want to learn more about, that's another good thing to kind of take a note on your piece of paper. And whether you want to reach out to me and ask, I could direct you to where there's more information, or see where that takes you on your own as well. The title of this project has shifted and evolved quite a bit over the last several weeks, and this is where it has landed at this point in time. Recentering the heart to deconstruct colonial consciousness from the inside out, and autoethnography. I'll mention, if you want to know more about the autoethnography, I go into detail in my blog number 2 or week 2. And again, we can engage in that as well. I'll mention it briefly later on. So my name is Maren McHugh. I didn't mention that. I think I know everyone though who's on the call. So thank you again for being here. And yeah, brief overview of what to expect. So next I'm going to go into a land acknowledgement. From there, I'll do a very brief overview of my project. So I'm sticking to what feels like important context for the second half of our time together, which is the framework that I have been working on and want to walk you through. And again, throughout the process, I encourage you to take notes. I really want this to be a collaboration, a co-creation. This framework is a work in progress, and I'm just feeling very honored and excited to be able to share it with all of you. All right, so I'm going to do my best not to read from my script here, but for this part, I am going to read, so you'll hear that in the tone of my voice. I am here in Calgary, Alberta, the traditional lands of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Métis Nation Districts 5 and 6, and the Treaty 7 region of southern Alberta, which consists of Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, the Tsuut'ina, the Ayaks Nakota Nations, including Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Goodstoney First Nation. I have come to see colonial history and the ongoing impacts of colonization as being a main contributor to our individual and collective sense of separation from the earth, ourselves, and each other. As I have engaged in repairing this rupture I have felt within myself, I have noticed a deeper sense of peace and connection when exploring the paths, peaks, and valleys of Nose Hill Park. A growing sense of awe and gratitude as I look out my windows and see the Rocky Mountains, and immeasurable gratitude from the life lessons of flow, power, and continuity that I receive when I float or sit near the Bow River. So I invite you to take a moment to feel and reflect on the land you call home and the areas you feel connected with. As you do that, I have a quick little blurb here to finish. So I'm an able and white-bodied, middle-class, heterosexual, neurodivergent, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth generation Canadian, cisgender female, with roots from the United Kingdom and Northern Europe. Much of my lineage filtered to Utah, Eastern Canada, and Alberta as Mormon pioneers, and I am astutely aware of the harm perpetuated by folks like me, whose good intentions are tainted by white saviorism. And I also acknowledge that I am the descendant of settlers who in many ways benefit from the devastation and harm of colonization. I am also aware that I am a settler who is committed to understand and repair the wounds that have been passed down by my lineage, to continue learning about this land and the diverse Indigenous peoples and cultures who are here before me and who are here now, all in service of doing what I can at this point in my life to actively engage in decolonization. So, why are we here? Why have I invited you here? One thing I want to mention is that one of the most powerful lessons I've learned, relearned in many ways over these last several weeks, actually many lessons, but I'll speak to one in particular for now, comes from a man named Chiokasin Ghost Horse of the Cheyenne River, Lakota. I watched a few of his webinars online, and one of the things that really struck me was that as he was giving a presentation, he said, I always come with an agenda, and he, referred to the papers that are next to him as I refer to the papers in front of me. But more than that, from what he said, he speaks from the place that has no agenda. So I want to continue practicing and embodying that. I have done the prep. I feel ready. There's structure. There's lots of content for us to move through. But I want to lead by example and continue to be in this practice of what it is to speak from my heart and be present with what's here now and what wants to happen and what wants to be said, and refer back to the structure of my agenda whenever I need a little bit of support. So there are 4 main pieces here of why I've invited you here. I've already kind of mentioned the first one, the accountability piece of my autoethnography. Autoethnography is really an invitational approach to research, where the researcher includes themselves inherently, their biases, their past experience, their perspectives, all of it is included to see how does that interact with the content that is being researched. As a modality, it's quite anti-colonial in many ways because of its storytelling nature, its requirement of vulnerability and reflexivity. So I'm not sure where this will take me in the end. This project's not fully done. It's done for now. This is a chapter closing, but there will be some more renditions or evolutions of this project as I continue with it. The second piece here is I'm really inspired to develop, be a part of, encourage the creation of a network of co-conspirators. Now, this was sparked from a webinar I was participating in a few weeks ago by a social worker named Kim Young. And one of my questions to her was, how do we engage in this work, knowing the importance of, change happens from the inside, inside institutions, inside agencies, But I was feeling a bit of hesitation and worry about putting myself in these places where I felt like it could be really more difficult than I feel ready to engage in. And she was the one who said it's important to recognize that this is about having a network of co-conspirators, people on the inside, people on the outside, that, you know, you don't need to be everywhere all at once. And really, this is about relationships and how you engage in the work together, how you support each other. And when I was imagining the word co-conspirator, I saw it in my mind with the word spirit in the middle, and I thought that's how it was spelt. And then looked it up, and it's not spelt that way. There's an A in place of one of those I's. But I'm going to stick with spirit in this word for now, because that's again alluding to this process of being together in a heart-centered way. So yeah, that's the second piece here, the network of co-conspirators. The third I've alluded to as well. I really want to collaborate, co-create, and receive and engage in feedback conversations. So I hope as you are here today or watching the recording, that this is something you can approach with the mindset of curiosity, and know that this is not fixed, this is not stagnant, it is quite the opposite in many ways. And your contribution, your energy makes a big difference and can be a part of how this evolves. So the last piece is the experimentation regarding clarity in my research question that has become more clear over the last several weeks. And that is how, as an ally, to stay grounded and or access regulation during activating situations in race or equity related conversations and inner work. So this, even as I read it, is a mouthful, but really, yeah, I'm hoping this will become more clear of how this has guided this project and where it's at now. Okay, so a brief overview of my project. I want to start with symbols, as this has become foundational in the way that I have organized not only this presentation, but much of how I've organized the massive amount of content and experiences I've had over these last several weeks. And what has appeared to me throughout some really discombobulating times, symbols have actually been really supportive and intriguing. And, you know, this quote here on the screen comes from Renee Linklater from the book, Decolonizing Trauma Work. So she says, traditional learning modalities eventually bring one to think intuitively, to think with the heart, to think circles, to understand and utilize dream, metaphor, and symbol. So there's a bunch of different symbols on the screen here. I'm only going to speak to a few of them. You see my blog in the bottom left corner. There's a lot of symbols that I speak to throughout the blog if you're feeling inclined to check that out. But the spiral is going to be our main symbol for our time together, as this has become actually the framework is in the shape of a spiral. And I'll mention briefly that the spiral has been with me for couple years now. I have a very great group of friends that we engage in some interesting witchy activities together. And as we were pulling oracle cards a couple years ago, one of my friends pulled the spiral, and the message on the card was so deeply in tune with where she was at and what she needed. And the prompt at the end of the card actually invited her to create a spiral somewhere where she could walk through it. And with her two little boys, she created a spiral with rocks on Nose Hill Park. And this card also gave instruction of how to work with the spiral. And the way it instructed was, you know, it's something that you stand on the outside of the spiral and feel into something that is a struggle, something you're having a hard time with, something that it feels blocked or stagnant in your body, in your psyche, in your life. And as you hold that, you walk through the spiral. And once you're at the center, you do an offering or you let it go. Let go of your struggle, and then walk out of the spiral feeling lighter. Now, initially, this seemed like a really cool activity, and we did it several times. Yet every time we did it, I still felt a little like something's off. There's something about it I don't really like. And what I was feeling into is that over the past several years, a big part of my practice has been around welcoming, allowing, accepting, radical inclusion. So this process or this concept of letting go of your struggle more and more started to feel like not violent, but exclusive. Like it's the opposite now of how I've learned to operate, that has actually been really integrative and powerful for me. So I shared this with another friend in this group, and over the series of events, we landed on this recognition that rather than letting go, it should be a process of opening up to your struggle, welcoming it with open arms, walking to the center of the spiral, and then tuning into what support could be needed so that we could expand out and hold our struggle in a more holistic way. So that piece of the spiral, that evolution of the spiral, was integral for where the framework is now. Now, next to the spiral are what looks like a V and then an inverted V, but it is supposed to be an X. I have them separated so that you can recognize it is both an X, but it's also just the inversion of the same shape. Now, this is something that represents as within, so without, or as above, so below. There's many different cultural depictions of this concept of as within, so without. Chiokasin Ghost Horse mentioned it as strong within the Lakota indigenous culture. It's also prevalent in Hermeticism. I'm sure with all of these symbols and everything I'm sharing, I could touch on like vast amounts of cultures and their different depictions of the same thing. But for now, I wanted to bring it in because it's an integral piece again of how I'm conceptualizing this work, and an important piece as we move into the framework to recognize that we are a reflection of the world, and the world is a reflection of us. I'll leave it at that for now. We'll come back to that. So the last one I'll mention here is the infinity loop. This is one that appeared to me in one of my own personal journeys as I was grappling with what was coming up for me. And it represented initially as this continuity of the past and the present. So I felt like one side of the infinity loop was very much now, the present, yet it was intricately, inherently connected to the past. And I felt how changing something in the present would influence the past. And at the same token, moving into the past or into memory and reframing that influences and changes how we perceive the present. As I spent more time with the infinity loop, there were another thing that really stood out to me were some numerology pieces, which you'll feel throughout this presentation as well. The infinity loop, you can see, has the number 4, right? On one side, there's a top and a bottom. On the other side, a top and a bottom. So 4, but it also very much is the number 8. And when looking into numerology, 4 represents foundation, stability, structure, and 8 represents continuity, infinity, right? The ongoing movement. There's no beginning, there's no end, there's just motion. So I played with that as I'm incorporating content to prepare us for the framework. I'm working with the number 4 to make sure that we feel grounded. There's some foundation, there's some structure, there's some stability. You'll see 4 in the framework, but then the framework also includes 8. There we go. All right. So the second piece here that's really important comes from the work of Resmaa Menakem. he's still doing amazing work. The premise of Resmaa Menakem's work here that I want to include is this understanding that we all have trauma in our bodies. And when trauma is unprocessed, when we're not aware of it, when we don't know how to be with it, it's very common for people to project their trauma or to live within their protective mechanisms. And that's how we see the world. So Resmaa goes into the history of why so many people would have trauma in their bodies. And he creates a really clear picture that, you know, during the Middle Ages, initially in Europe, at least, there was a lot of white body on white body brutality. It was also from the government. It was torture, and you know, the way that people treated each other was just brutal. And many of those people from the Middle Ages moved to the New World, right? Moved to Northern America, wasn't called that back then, to escape the brutality, but with all of this unprocessed trauma in their bodies. And this is what he foresees as part of why so many people are so harmful to each other and engage in a way of us versus them and othering, and have a hard time regulating themselves, because when we have a lot of trauma in our body, little things can trigger us. And when we feel that emotion take over, that can be quite overwhelming, and we don't understand it, or we don't have resources or structure to be with it, then we just engage in what we've done in the past or what we're seeing around us. We can't think in new ways. We can't engage in new ways when we're in that triggered state. So we just do what we've done in the past. And for many of us, what was done or modeled around us in the past was brutal. So he refers to this as the virus of racism in our body, that it's, you know, what I really enjoy about this is that it's less about blaming. It's more inclusive, it's humanizing. It's recognizing that while we don't want to validate and make violence or brutality okay, of course not, but this is a way that we can start to recognize that people who are engaging in very hurtful actions are hurting on the inside. And we need to find new ways of being with ourselves and being with each other so that we can process this hurt and find new ways to operate together. So this image really depicts this nicely for me. So this is from Burning Man Festival in 2015. This is a Ukrainian artist who created this structure, and it's, you know, pretty self-explanatory in many ways, like two adult bodies hurt, turning away from each other, right? Think about their posture. You can even feel that in your own body, closing down, protecting their hearts. And inside are these children that look so desperately like they want to connect. And yeah, I think this has been a really powerful image for me to keep in mind as I get to know more of my parts that are, you know, inner children or inner adolescents that are wounded and protected. The more I do this work myself, the more I can see that in other people. And that's how we can start to access more compassion, patience, maybe a little more understanding, a little more willingness to lean in and get to know what's going on beneath that protective mechanism. So number 3 here is, while it's important to understand the roots of why we would get into a place of othering or domination, right? This elite or empire mentality of we need to dominate to win or to survive. It's one thing to understand this. It's another to recognize how this is continually recreated in our culture. There was a beautiful paper, I believe it was 1995. It was a while back. Tima Oken wrote a paper about white supremacy culture and the multiple ways that our culture continues to recreate these tenets of white supremacy. without us really recognizing it. And it's turned into a beautiful website. I highly recommend you can type into Google Tima Oken or white supremacy culture, and she goes into depth. It's a collaborative website. She features many different amazing thinkers and social justice workers in this realm. One thing to keep in mind that I really enjoy that she speaks about this is that this is not meant to be something that is weaponized, and it's not a checklist in the sense that, you know, anytime you see one of these things, that means there's white supremacy present. It's not that black and white, which is, you know, part of what we need to start recognizing is it's not that simple, right? These are tools to pause and be in reflection, to notice when there's impulsivity around one of these or many of these, and to get to know how it might be operating in your own system. So as I was engaging in this work, I became very cognizant of a tendency, an impulsive tendency to engage in power over. And not only was this in my environment, when I would start to feel a little bit rattled or unsettled, uncomfortable, I would have a bit of a stance of like, how can I control my environment so that I feel more safe? But I was also doing it internally. When I would feel a little bit uncomfortable, I would have other parts jump in and engage in power over, kind of push away the discomfort to protect me from feeling it. So this is a really great list to consider, and again, engage in reflection to start questioning what we might perceive as normal or as, you know, this is just the way that it is, and start to get curious around, well, why? And is there another way? Could we be a little bit more open or flexible or invite in other possibilities? Because what's happening right now is not working. So we need to find other ways of engaging and doing this work. So a few questions that you can ask yourself. So this comes from the bias-free framework. I've kind of curated these questions from the list that they showed some like 3 common biases that people fall into, and I shifted it so it could be posed as questions. So am I maintaining hierarchy and status quo? Can I notice, shift, and examine multiple perspectives? Am I using dualistic language or comparison that is inherently exclusive or uses power over? Right? So we can use this as a way to pause and start to recognize how we are playing a part in this recreation of colonialism, recreation of white supremacy culture, not in any fault of our own. It's modeled around us. It's in our education. It's, for many of us, the way we were raised. So if we can ask these questions and start to slowly deconstruct what we think is normal, we can start to recognize that there's other ways of showing up. So the last piece here is that on the other side of this black and white thinking, on the other side of us versus them, of dualism, is the concept of non-dualism. Chaos and rigidity, when they work together, are how we get integration, right? So Daniel Siegel writes about this quite a bit, that, you know, in between chaos and rigidity, when they are included, we move into this process of integration where there's both and there's inclusivity. Too much of either one of these leaves us in a place of overwhelm or being stuck, being unable to improvise or collaborate with what's right in front of us. But when these two come together, something new emerges. We find ourselves in a state of being quite open, adaptive, flexible, right? But both are needed. We need a little bit of chaos. We need a little bit of rigidity. We need them to play together. And I'm bringing this up now because this will be important as we move into the framework as well. So the last piece here is the multiplicity and higher self. I've been deeply moved and informed by internal family systems created by Richard Schwartz, and it has been developed and expanded quite a bit over the last few decades. Now, the main concept to understand within internal family systems is that it is a model of multiplicity, which is speaking to parts within us, within our own psyche, and how to be integrated is not to be a unified whole. It's actually to be inclusive of all of these different parts within us working together in harmony, like an orchestra. And the leader of this orchestra is our higher self. And the higher self is emulated through heart-centered qualities, which we'll discuss a little bit here as well. But when we're in a place of feeling compassionate, curious, quite calm, open, present, these are all qualities that the higher self embodies. And when we are in this place of our more higher self, we can turn towards the parts of us that might be in struggle or are exiled, separated from our system, and invite them back into connection and access more of the wisdom from our heart. Now, this is a fractal system in the sense that, again, it is as above, so below, as within, so without. So, for example, every part within us has a higher self, right? So it's a very inclusive system as we recognize the different layers of how this system works. And just as we are a multiplicity and every part has a higher self, so is true with everybody else, right? We all have this multiplicity in our system. And the more we can do the work of recognizing this, the more we can turn towards others and have a little bit more compassion and understanding. Okay, so the last piece here is very similar. It's just coming back to this place of recognizing that, all models aside, this is a process of reconnecting with our own heart, right? Colonialism, white supremacy culture is a process of disconnection, division, disconnection. And if we're going to change that system, we need to be mindful of the tools that we're using, because if they're tools of power over, if they're tools of dehumanizing or othering, well, we're just using the same tools that created the problem. So leaning into our heart, learning how to engage in heart-centered qualities, learning how to pause and regulate ourselves before we move forward, before we engage. This is how we can actually change the tools that we're using and connect with each other in new ways. So with that, I want to start moving towards the experience of the framework, so that it's one thing to have some knowledge and understanding. It's another to feel it in your body and have an experience of it. So an important piece of this framework is breath, and specifically heart-brain coherence. Now, this is an image pulled from the Heart Math Institute website. Basically, what this is showing in the top incoherence window is that when we are feeling emotions like frustration, anxiety, worry, or irritation, our heart rate, our heart rhythm looks, well, to me in this moment, it looks like fire. It looks very erratic. It's all over the place. It is incoherent, right? There's no pattern. There's no stability there. And as our heart rate is shown in this very erratic, sharp lines, our breath is a part of that. So our breath will be really short. It'll be in the chest. There might be long pauses and then quick bursts of air, right? Our breathing will be incoherent. Now, because we know as within, so without, we can look on the outside and see all these things that we want to change, but that's not how change works. If we start on the inside, this is what we intimately have connection with, is what's going on inside. So if we can shift our breath, looking down to the bottom square here, into a coherent pattern, where the breath is balanced. So it could be 4 or 5 or 6 seconds in, 4 or 5, 6 seconds out, as long as it's balanced, maintaining that for a few minutes while focusing on a positive emotion like patience or compassion, or presence or love or care, that this now starts to shift our internal system. It is a way of bringing in safety signals. It calms our system down. And when we are calm and present and our breath is rhythmic, our heart is open, we can see, we can shift perspectives, we can be creative, we can, reassure ourselves or calm ourselves down. This is where we actually have power, is when we move in, shift our internal chemistry, and recognize that's the only way we can create change externally, is by focusing first on what's going on internally. So briefly, these are the steps of heart-brain coherence. I wrote down here in the bottom left corner, in internal family systems, Richard Schwartz developed this list of the 8 C's and the 5 P's of our higher self. So this is a great place to start when it comes to heart-centered qualities. When we practice heart-brain coherence, it's helpful to choose one of these from the list and really focus on it. So you'll see in the steps on the right, I mentioned the balanced breath. So that's the first piece, is shifting your breath slowly into a balanced rhythm. Ideally, we want to be relaxed in the belly, right? There's more parasympathetic receptors or parasympathetic nervous system receptors in the belly, which means that when our belly's relaxed and it is expanding and then contracting on the exhale, that is sending safety signals throughout our body. So I like to follow this rhythm of 70-20-10 when I'm practicing heart-brain coherence. So 70% of your inhale is low belly, low back. 20% is ribs laterally in all directions. And the final 10% is the front, side, and back of your heart. And if you can focus on that with each breath, that's how we can get our whole torso expanding on the inhale. And it's not just dominant in one area of the torso. The more we relax, the more our whole torso expands together. So it's more of an expansion out versus a lifting up as we breathe in. And every exhale, total relaxation, start over. Again, we focus on our heart as we're breathing and choosing a heart-centered quality or emotion. And I like to use the cue of your breath is both the message and the messenger. So the rhythm of your breath is the message, right? Remembering this screen before, right? A short, erratic breath is a message of anxiety, of fear, of irritation. But a rhythm of breath that is slow, balanced, right? Soft edges, that's a message of love, care, safety. But then we can also infuse a message into the breath by using our cognition, focusing on our heart, choosing a heart-centered quality. And now the breath becomes that messenger. We're choosing the emotion, infusing into the breath, and then it expands throughout our body as we stay with that rhythm. Okay, so I'm mindful of time here. We have around just under 20 minutes, and I want to make sure that we have a good 10 minutes in the framework. So these are the last couple slides here. This is the description of the framework, and then we're going to move into the practice. So you see a spiral here. The steps are 4 steps in, 4 steps out. So there we have our 4 and we have our 8. The first step is A. So you imagine yourself standing on the outside of the spiral, or at this point you can draw a spiral on your piece of paper. And we can play with this in a few different ways. So as we move through this process, I'll invite you to either focus on a struggle that you're already aware of, something that's going on, like a habit you're struggling with, or an emotion or a sensation. But if that feels inaccessible, or now's not the right time to do that, you could also choose a concept that I've already, introduced throughout this presentation or something similar to it. So for example, you could stand on the outside of the spiral and invite in the concept of white fragility, for example, and then use that as your experiment to see what happens, right? So A is accept and allow. So as we invite in or open ourselves to the struggle or the concept that we want to experiment with, we accept it, we allow it, we welcome it, we open our arms to it. The second step, B, is breathe, but specifically heart-brain coherence. So I'll guide you into that balanced rhythm. And for some of you, it might be helpful to choose a heart-centered quality or emotion to give yourself a little bit more inner resource and support. The next step, so C, is center your own nervous system. Now, an important part of this process is shifting perspectives, right? Being able to recognize I'm not the center of the universe, but that doesn't mean that you don't matter. It's very important that we all have the ability to center ourselves occasionally, and just as important to be able to pivot out of that, expand out, center somebody else, or recognize, as Chiokusan Ghost Horse mentioned, one of his mentors, Black Elk, would often say the center is everywhere. Or in Buddhism, they have the concept of the centerless center, which to me it's very much the same thing. It's recognizing if we're interconnected, if we're all one, the center is everywhere. But what's also true is we have an individual experience, and I have my own center, equal truths. It's the ability to be able to pivot from one to the other appropriately. So as we're spiraling in, we need to center our own nervous system. We need to track what's happening, be with the sensations. And as we get to the center, we then differentiate. So this is where we can potentially recognize, oh, I am not this struggle. This is a part of me that's having an issue that's dysregulated or a sensation that feels uncomfortable. And then we turn towards it, right? We differentiate. But differentiation is not complete until we come back to integration. So once we've differentiated, we then stay at D and we ask a deep question. Now, my prompt at this point for the deep question for this experience is feeling into the question of, you know, what support do I need in this moment? So we're getting away from problem solving or needing to have anything figured out. And instead, this is about tuning into your heart and getting curious of what other heart-centered quality would be really supportive. What would help me hold this with a little bit more ease, or what would help me expand out? That's all we're trying to do, right? Is what heartfelt quality can help me be with this? So once we've sat with that question, we then spiral our way back out. And we come back to C, where we have this moment of interconnectedness, right? If you're with somebody else, maybe you center their own nervous system for a moment, or find the centerless center, expand out to where the center is everywhere, right? So we remember, okay, we're all in this together. B, now we move into bilateral stimulation. So a little bit of rocking side to side or shifting your weight from side to side. It's deeply regulating. It could be a simple tap from side to side or moving your eyes from side to side. And then lastly, we finish with appreciation as you anchor into presence. And this is where you can improvise, collaborate with heart-centeredness. Now, this framework, I foresee this as something that is an assist with anything else, any other framework, any other work. This is not about replacing frameworks. This is not the framework. This is something that is adaptive and flexible to help ourselves stay a little more present, stay in a conversation or in content a little bit longer. I've found myself using this actually quite a bit over the last few days. Anytime I feel a little bit uncomfortable, a sensation that tightens me up, I imagine the spiral and I start moving through the steps, and it's been so helpful. So with that, we start with the structure of the steps, but as you play and practice with this, I really hope it'll become flexible. Like as I have played with this, ABC kind of in most times happen almost at the same time. The deep question changes, differentiation sometimes happens right away. So it's something that can be, mix and match. But first we need to feel the structure and have an experience of it for ourselves. Okay, so as we move through this, I'll mention you don't have to do this by any means. If for whatever reason you don't feel comfortable and you want to have a little bit of distance and just listen without engaging, totally okay. Another thing you can potentially try on is that at any point, if you find what you've invited in or welcomed feels actually too big or too heavy or overwhelming, practice asking what's overwhelming you. If it could just, open the door, maybe just 5% instead of 100%, so that you could just feel a little bit of the struggle without it being overwhelming. Sometimes that can be helpful. And additionally, there might be multiple things that come up, right? Sometimes as we're moving in, you might not have words to describe what you're feeling. That's okay. You might start with one sensation or one struggle and it might morph, or something else might come up. That's okay as well. And you don't have to have anything figured out. I've learned from practicing this over the last couple of weeks that just doing the journey in and the journey out can provide some clarity, and putting pen to paper, writing about it, or engaging in conversation after can really help with the processing as well. So pressure off. You don't have to have anything figured out. This is about experimenting, experiencing, and just seeing what it's like for yourself. Okay. All right. So if you'd like to move through this framework with me, you can take a few moments to readjust, settle into your seat. You can keep your eyes on the screen if you'd like. You could also draw the spiral on your piece of paper if you haven't already, or just imagine a spiral. Eyes open or closed. We'll begin with step one of taking a few moments to tune into the struggle, the stuck energy, the sensation, anything that you feel you'd like to get to know a little bit more. There might be multiple things that come up, so you can take a few moments to tune into, landing on relatively, one concept. Or again, for anyone who doesn't want to move into what's going on right now, you can open yourself up to just holding the concept of white fragility or white supremacy, or black and white, or power over. So these next few moments, knowing you don't have to have it figured out, just tuning into what that might look like for you. And we accept and allow what we're noticing. We welcome it. And as we welcome it, we move into our breath. So right away, notice how you're breathing. And see if you can guide your breath. Relax your belly a little bit more, guiding your breath towards balance. Bringing your attention towards your heart, whether it's with your mind's eye or sometimes a hand onto your heart can be helpful. And if you're feeling a little bit of support is needed here as you're welcoming your struggle or concept, there might be a word on the screen here that aligns with what you feel you need. Sometimes just the balanced breath could be enough. As we continue welcoming and breathing as we center our own nervous system. That you're tracking sensation, you're noticing. What are you feeling in your body right now? So you continue welcoming. Slow, balanced breath. Nothing to figure out, no problems to solve, just being with yourself, with what's changing, what's moving, what's not moving, what's not changing. Imagining yourself walking towards the center of the spiral. As you continue welcoming, allowing, accepting, breathing, noticing sensation. And as you get to the center of the spiral, no rush. We engage in some differentiation. So you recognize that you are not your struggle. You are not this part of you. It is a part of you, but you're more than that. You can turn towards what you're noticing. Continue being with it as you have been. Now, for anyone who is feeling like just continuing with A, B, C, maybe D is where you need to be, that's perfect. Right? Maybe you spiral in a little bit and then you come back out, and you spiral in a bit and come back out, right? There's different ways you can engage with this. But for anyone who's feeling ready or this is appropriate for them, you could ask the deep question of, what support do I need here? Or what heart-centered quality would be really supportive? Holding space for yourself as you feel into what would be supportive. Continue your balanced breath, noticing sensation, welcoming what's here. And when you feel ready, begin walking out of the spiral. And see what it's like as we come to this letter C again, to take a moment to expand out, feel into our interconnectedness. The centerless center, the center is everywhere. It's not meant to diminish your experience. You are a part of the centerless center, the interconnectedness, an integral part. Continue your balanced breath. Find a little bit of bilateral stimulation that feels good for you. Sometimes just the most subtle rocking side to side. Or again, moving your eyes from side to side, feeling your weight shift. Imagining your breath moving from one side of your body to the other. And then we finish here, stepping out of the spiral as we appreciate every part of ourselves, appreciate this moment, appreciate each other, to anchor into presence, ready to collaborate, to improvise, to be, to practice. And I invite you here, whether you want to just stay inside, breathing, being with what's here, or put pen to paper. As we come to the end of our time together. I'm going to stop the share here. And I'm going to stop the recording here. Thank you, everyone.